What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Trafficking Free America podcast. My name is Jeremy, and today we are going to discuss trauma. What causes trauma, and how does that ultimately affect sex trafficking? How does that affect sexual addiction? How does that affect multiple things that ultimately becomes a cancer in our life and our society? And how can we ultimately deal with it? Today we have a licensed therapist, Corey, talking to us about the trauma, how it ultimately occurs, and then our two commentaries, Alan and Dave. Alan, Dave, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience.
Hi, I'm Alan Texera. I'm glad to be here. I founded the Sexual Integrity Project 5 years ago, and I'm a recovered sex buyer. Dave, tell them a little bit about yourself.
I'm David Hudson. I'm a therapist in Wesley Chapel, Florida, specializing in sex addiction, and I've worked with the Sexual Integrity Project from the beginning for 5 years now. And I'm very excited to also sit here with Corey and learn about some of the origins of trauma that lead into some of these unwanted sexual behaviors, including that lead up to human trafficking. So, Jeremy, I appreciate you letting us be here, my man.
Absolutely. And now, the man of the hour, Corey. Corey, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about your story of ultimately what got you into this work.
Sure. I didn't come into counseling like through a direct path. Or to be a licensed counselor. I started off life as a pastor. Once I graduated with my undergrad, I went off to a seminary, got my MDiv, spent 12, 13 years working in church full-time or trying to work in church full-time, and then ended up having this big shift in my life where things hadn't gone the way I expected, and I needed to figure out something else to do. And had another counselor actually suggest that I would be a good therapist. So I went down that path and didn't know what I was going to do with it. Found out as a volunteer, as a student volunteer, that a lot of my clients, the common factor to most of their problems with this was that they were dealing with complex trauma experienced in childhood. And that common factor kind of led me down a path of exploring that myself. And then after I graduated, I went to work at a psychiatric practice. We had a lot of very high acuity patients with multiple problems. And once again, I was faced with the same thing, whether it was bipolar or schizophrenia or drug addictions or sex addictions. These clients were dealing with childhood wounds as a significant part of their problem. And so it made me go out and get supervision specifically to become a trauma specialist. And then since then, so the last 7 years, that's what I've been doing.
Awesome. Well, talk to us about ultimately what causes trauma in many ways in our lives. When does it start? What is the most common thread that you're seeing in so many ways? And how does that relate to sex trafficking?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the complex trauma that I see, it's different than PTSD. PTSD was based on a model of events happening later on in life. Someone's life is going along pretty well and they have a big event that they can't account for and it causes symptoms. The clients that I see tend to have symptoms that started so early on they can't remember it. We're talking about ages prior to the age of 2. And now we're in the arena of what's called attachment theory, or that primary attachment between the primary caregiver, typically the mother, and the child. And when there's a disruption there, it disrupts the child's development, it disrupts their ability to make strong connections with other people, and then that can kind of blossom into some of these other disorders we see later in life when gone untreated. So it can look at like drug addiction, sex addiction, other addictions as well.
Would you say it's all the parents' fault?
Yeah, it's a complicated picture. Your home environment is part of it. Your genetic predisposition is also part of it. Your God-given personality is part of it. So when you mix that all together, they work in collaboration to produce good outcomes, or they also collaborate to produce poor outcomes. So yeah, it's a complicated picture. And then you layer on choices as a child grows into a young teen and then into early adulthood. Their own choices either provide protective factors where they find maybe other adults that they can attach to, they find protective communities that they can be a part of, and then they go down a path of healing. or some feel isolated. They feel a lot of shame. They use poor coping strategies that they have to pay a high cost to use. And then that brings them into this cycle where they feel ashamed about what they're doing to cope, and then they isolate further, and then their relationships deteriorate, and they lose access to the very things that they'll need to heal.
Now, I want to dive deeper into kind of what causes trauma, and because you're able to go deeper into how it affects your brain and so on and so forth. But I'm curious, based upon what you just said, when it comes to ultimately learning how to cope correctly. And because correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like many people have the ability to experience trauma in one way or another. And it's not like, oh, some people have trauma and some people don't. In many ways, we all have it.
Sure.
But we just know a better way to deal with it. Would you say that that's accurate, inaccurate?
Well, better. I'll try to say
sure,
things
yeah.
simply. The graphic I have up on the screen really talks about our body's stress response. So our brains respond to stress regardless of whether it's a small stressor. You get an unwanted email, a coworker yells at you. We respond to stress that the same way as we do. My wife tells me I want a divorce. It's just about magnitude, really. So our brains respond to stress in a very predictable pattern. We start when the more stress we experience, the more our brain shut down. It goes from left to right, and then as stress increases, like that arrow shows, we begin to move down in our brain. So we move towards earlier phases of development. So we move out of our left and right hemispheres. We move down into our limbic system where our emotions are generated. This is emotions and motivation that kind of come out of that area. I realize I'm being way oversimplistic here, so if you know more about neuroscience, please be patient with this. And then if we get stressed out enough, we'll move down into our brainstem, and that's where you see a lot of really disorganized behaviors come out of. Fight, flight, freeze, fawn, big outbursts of anger, things that don't make sense to people observing on the outside. So all of us will respond to stress that same way if we're put under enough pressure. And it can be something temporary or rather transient, right? We experience a stressor, we get in an auto wreck, a fender bender. We come out, we're shaking, we're in our brainstem, we're yelling and talking loud. And then as we connect with people and calm down over time, our stress decreases and we move back up to where we're able to think clearly and talk about the incident. We're able to remember the emotions we had and the way our bodies felt, and that feels safe, and we're able to connect with it and integrate it. When it comes to traumatic experiences, we have emotions and body sensations that are so large that our brain doesn't want to cope with them. And so to different degrees, we shut those down. Sometimes that may be a conscious process where you're like, oh, I just don't want to think about that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it might be an unconscious process where your brain literally will not let you remember or re-experience that unless you're in a state where you're kind of flooded by it and you're in it, and then it feels like there's this radical disconnect from your normal self. And so many of my clients experience that when they're triggered by a trauma memory. They move from their left hemisphere where our verbal centers are located and you're able to talk about things into the right, and then they move down. And when they move down, they're in this world of imagery and experience and body sensation. They feel small, helpless, young, and it feels very disconnected from their normal self, the adult that you would meet on the street or sit by in a pew at church.
When people are coming to you, what state are they typically in when they start approaching, okay, I got to deal with this?
Yeah.
Is it usually like before something happens, many times after something happens,
Yeah, usually something has happened, right? The reason why you might come to therapy is because something is going on in your life that some kind of symptom, something you don't like, something's negatively impacting your marriage. I get people who come to me who things seem fine, and then they get married, and let's say if they have sexual abuse as part of their history, now what should be a bonding experience with your partner is a triggering experience, and they don't know what's going on. And so they're seeking to have an environment where they can explore that and learn more about why are they responding to a trigger that way. So that's one of the ways. I get other people who come, they've had an experience at work, or they've had experience in other areas of life where, once again, they're having some sort of symptom that they can't tolerate any longer.
Well, and I know there's, again, we're only scratching the surface here, not going super deep into probably years of therapy, right? But what is one of the first things you ultimately, one of the core things you suggest? And it sounded like you were kind of saying like connection with people, relationships,
Sure,
is something that is a huge benefactor to dealing with that trauma and overcoming some of that, right?
Yeah, so a couple of things are really important at the beginning of therapy. One is that people need to slow down. So what I find is many of my clients are repeating stressful life experiences. So they're recreating the stress, maybe not in the same way, but in other ways, typically other ways that are more socially acceptable. But they're still recreating that stressful environment. So they live in relationship chaos. They do too much at home. They can even do like really good things. They clean too much. They volunteer for too much. They have so much going on that it's recreating that early stressful environment. And so what I ask them to do is, before we can do work, you have to slow down. You have to decrease your stress. You have to keep your brain from following that same path and pattern where you're living in most of them will say, I'm living in my limbic system.
Sure.
You know, I'm so stressed out all the time, and I'm comfortable with it to a degree. I'm familiar with this. So to get to a point where you can process things and understand yourself, you have to de-stress enough that you can move back into that left and right hemisphere interacting together, and feel a sense of safety. The other thing that the therapeutic environment provides is that sense of containment and safety. So it often starts off as that one-on-one relationship, because in that room we can control a lot of the factors. So you can begin to experiment. What is it like to have a therapist who's really in sync with me, who is willing to listen to me, hear my problems, help me re-regulate when I become dysregulated? And with the goal of, as that goes on, then we help them expand out into other forms of help. You take the skills that you learn in the therapy office and you move them out into your marriage, your family. You move them out into your church groups. You move them out to things like Celebrate Recovery, AA, or groups like the Sexual Integrity Project offer. But that transition has to happen at some point in time. You have to go from what you're learning in that safe environment of the therapy office to the real world.
Alan, in your experience in the Sexual Integrity Project, when are they often coming to Sexual Integrity Project after seeking a therapist? Or are you encouraging them to seek a therapist after they come? What is usually the order?
It's typically the latter. I mean, I'll just be honest. Most guys come because there's been a discovery.
Sure.
And oftentimes they're not there really for the right reasons. It's just they know it's expected of them. They're trying to placate their spouse. We call the situation, we call them possums, right? They're just going through the motions, but they're not really invested in it. They're not really doing the homework. They're not really connecting, at least not yet.
Yeah.
Some of those guys get a lot of traction.
Yeah.
Some of them wash out, but they know where to go when they get serious. To answer the second part of the question, yes, we know many therapists in the area that we know are good. And when we discover through check-ins, conversations, or homework exercises in the recovery group that somebody is a good candidate for therapy, sometimes that's in a general sense. Other times we know it's a trauma or a situation that goes beyond the scope of what our program offers. And the way that we solve for that gap is we make referrals and encourage that person to get the right kind of therapy. And we even have therapy scholarships to facilitate if finances are a burden or a barrier. We try to deal with that.
Because like how do you separate out, like, you know, hey, we got to work through this in group therapy and stuff like that, and seeing a therapist? How are we balancing that act? And there's kind of a question.
Ideally, if someone needs therapy, that should all be happening at the same time.
Well, wouldn't you say that everyone needs therapy who's coming to the Sexual Integrity Project?
Maybe I can
Go ahead, Corey.
Help answer this question. different people need different amounts of safety to be able to begin to explore the things that are causing their behaviors. Sometimes a group environment feels very unsafe to the individual.
Sure.
If that's the case, then one-on-one therapy is very helpful because it's just the two of you in that room. You can control a lot of the factors. You can control who knows what information. And that provides that sense of safety for the client to be able to explore. Some people feel comfortable enough in a group that they can begin to work just in a group, and they'll be able to do the vast majority or maybe all of their work in a group setting, which is fantastic. Others need that one-on-one care.
What is important in a group therapy, though? Because while it's good to have group in a sense of like you have other people around you that are experiencing what you're experiencing in many ways, you got to have someone facilitating that session.
Yeah.
And so who should be facilitating? Should it be someone as yourself?
Someone who, I've run across a lot of really good therapists in different forms. I've known some pastors who are great therapists. Just intuitively, they do a great job. I've known AA sponsors who are phenomenal gentlemen. They get it. They've been through the process of feeling uncomfortable themselves. They know what to look for in individuals, and they know how to create safety in a group. So really, if you have someone who can be incredibly consistent and predictable, create a group that has consistent boundaries, is safe, people know what to expect when they show up, and strikes a balance between challenging but also respecting, then you've really found a good home. So whether it's somebody who's licensed or whether it's someone who's been, usually someone like Alan, who's been through the process and gets it, they know the recipe for healing.
Yeah.
And then they're serving their community by duplicating that experience for somebody else. So they can come in a lot of different forms.
In my experience, as I've been creating content for educating the public about sex trafficking and helping others understand usually what it comes from, and the basics is like, a traumatic experience, which creates vulnerability, which makes a victim vulnerable to becoming sex trafficked, or a buyer becoming vulnerable to ultimately go after the addiction, cause all those things. But then there's another side where it's just been hidden so well for so long. We talked about this in another episode where, pastors are it's coming out as they're struggling with this. As someone who was the pastor, someone who's been a therapist now for a while, what do you think is, because I guess what I'm trying to say is it's almost like we're seeing some people being exposed for undealt with addictions, but we don't really see the typical trauma of their lives. Oh, they grew up in a good home.
Sure.
They grew up in this circumstance. What's wrong? How did that happen? The surprise trauma, if you would, maybe, for lack of better terms. What would you? Maybe you understand what I'm saying?
So let me just see if we're on the same page.
Yeah.
So we have people that look like they're living a very normal life, very typical life. You don't see acting out. You don't see they're not coming home drunk.
Yeah.
People on the outside can't tell, and they can't see the processes that are going on the inside.
Sure.
And then there's some sort of event. Someone gets found out. An image pops up on a phone. Someone looks at their browser history, or they get caught on camera somewhere, and all of a sudden this whole hidden lifestyle emerges. So you're asking, like, what's the cause of that? Or
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is what are the common things you find out when someone's able to hide it for so long and so well? Yeah, it's almost like for someone who, I guess I'm a person who likes to wear my emotions on my shoulders. Like if I have something going on, everyone's going to know. And it's the person that is so surprising. Like what? They had all their ducks in order, right? Like and stuff, almost like to where they let you into the closet and everything looked fine. Yeah. What are usually the symptoms or the situations that you're finding in those places? Again, like they grew up in a good home.
Sure.
Why would they have all this?
Well, I mean, things happen to us all the time that we find very challenging to talk about. Let's take a kid that grows up in a good home, and parents get a divorce. Now mom has to work 2 jobs, is alone often. One interaction with a cousin or the neighbor kid down the street, you get molested. Something's wrong with me. Now I repeat a pattern of trying to figure out what's going on. So kids will play to try to figure out things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So somebody molests me. I molest my brother.
Mm.
What do I do with that? I don't want to tell anybody. I don't even understand what happened.
Mm-hmm.
But now I'm very aroused and I feel shame. And so what do I do with that? I try to explore it more when I hit my early teen years and teenage years. And now I'm looking at pornography that might have to do with some element of the molestation. I'm trying to figure it out still, but I'm too ashamed to talk to anybody. And I go off into my career and, heaven forbid I get called into the ministry. And now those things that I'm wrestling with, I've got to keep silent. I've got to keep locked up. I can't share that with anyone because what are they going to think of me?
Sure.
And that just grows in the dark. And instead of encouraging people to really look into their own patterns, be honest with others, have accountability, find a safe place where you can explore that and pick that apart. What are the choices I'm making? Because, as an adult, I'm making my own choices to persist in this pattern of behavior. And then what were the things that happened to me? What were the things that weren't my fault? The things that just maybe random chance. I was in the wrong place at the wrong time.
See, that's a component I'd like to add in.
Mm-hmm.
If you'd imagine sort of modern photography, you have the subject in the middle that's crystal clear, right? Like 8K. You can see every detail of the subject. But everything in the background's really hazy,
Fuzzy.
faded out, fuzzy, right? Those images. What that represents is abuse, which is often in the environment of neglect. So if I heard your question right, not everyone had a specific trauma event that led to this shame core that develops into addiction and so on. Sometimes it is in the arena of neglect, all the things that didn't happen. What happens in both cases, both in neglect and in abuse, there's a narrative that the person develops about who they are, what they are, where they fit. And sometimes some of the people that come in, they don't have this story about I was abused as a child or beat up or sexually molested. Sometimes they were just left to their own device. One of the guys who works with us has a story where it was 3 months in his own home, he didn't even speak to his father. Like they lived together and they just didn't interact. They didn't cross each other. That's neglect, man.
Sure.
And so he grew up creating this narrative that he wasn't good enough, that he wasn't enough, and he wanted to seek that. So I think part of the question was sometimes people aren't showing the full story because they're hiding. But sometimes they don't even have the full story because they don't even know what happened.
Yeah.
It's just stuff that didn't happen.
It's stuff that's coming out of there's an interesting podcast that was created by Christianity Today, where they talked about it's kind of crazy how if you look back in the I think early 90s, you think about the satanic children who killed somebody, and then the Duggar family. And I think it's like moments like that where we're going, where does trauma come from really?
Sure.
Because this one had a very traumatic life, so it makes sense that they're a murderer and that they didn't murder anybody. Where then you have this one, it's like, well, they come from a very nice family, but the guys, we all know this story, right?
Yeah.
So I guess what I'm getting at is like, what is our approach to prevention on this, if there is any?
Yeah. How do we create safe environments where people can relearn patterns, rework through relationships? My understanding about early childhood attachments was initially when we did the research, we thought it was fairly permanent. More recently, you're reading more and more research that says it's fairly plastic. If we can provide people opportunities to experience a healthy dynamic with people who really get relationships, then they have an opportunity. They're invited to that opportunity to change.
Yeah.
And they can rewire their relationships. They can learn what's healthy. And they can learn to tolerate the distress that they feel, which is so important. We want to move away from some forms of therapy call it like the bad me self, the things inside me that are bad. And so as those as we experience triggers or things come up that we don't like, we go, oh, that's my bad self, and I want to move away from it. But then every now and then that bad self comes out and just consumes me. And so then I binge on porn, or I masturbate, or I buy sex. And then I move away from it again. But if we can create environments where people can explore those sides of themselves, where they can have safety and acceptance, then we have a chance to integrate that, and we have a chance to see that we can be accepted, we can be loved for our totality. And so that is something that we can do, whether it's in, you're going to find this, that gets provided for, whether you're in an IOP program, if it's done well, whether you're in CR, Celebrate Recovery, AA, a church group. The thing that promotes change is that, back to what Carl Rogers called it, the unconditional positive regard, the I'm for you. I'm here for you, and we can tolerate these distressful feelings. And they're not unsafe, they're just uncomfortable. And so if we can move that from that sense of unsafe to uncomfortable, and we can tolerate this distress together, then every time the client has that experience, that positive experience of, I tolerate distress, I re-regulate, whether it's with a therapist one-on-one or whether it's with a group, then their arousal level, their stress decreases by just a little bit as associated with that memory. And then you do that over and over again. And sometimes they get to the point where they might even enjoy, like, hey, I value this. Like, just tolerating or connecting with my distress it's really not distressing anymore. It's just uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And now I can sit with that, so I can now build relationships because I can be uncomfortable with relationships and know that they're safe.
Last question I have for you. Alan, you want to say something real quick?
I did. I just kept thinking as he was speaking about how profound an experience it is to live out that plasticity. For Christians, this happens a lot with our maturing faith. And, you hear it in a lot of Christian music. Megan Wood says, I don't belong to the lies. I belong to him, and that's the truth. And my wife and I saw Lauren Daigle earlier this week, and her song You Say, same exact message. And so I think there are a lot of people who have experienced this, of moving out of a maladjusted attachment style because they were just born into a situation that nobody deserves. And it impacted them deeply, but they were able to heal. And there just aren't words for how much freedom you can feel if that comes to you in your life somehow, some way. It's very powerful.
Adding to what Alan is saying, the other really important factor to know about this process is that this isn't a verbal endeavor. One of the last things in our brain to really mature is that left side in those verbal centers where we describe, it's often called like that meta center that describes everything else that is going on below. When it comes to attachment, it's really this idea of embodied attunement, and something we have to experience. We can't just read it in a book or write about it or describe it with words, because that's like the icing on our cake. We have to be able to go down and eat the rest of the cake, which is sitting with somebody and actually feeling those body sensations, the emotions, the things that are coming from our limbic system and are coming up and facilitated through that big picture right hemisphere.
Yeah.
That's what often is called the unconscious or the preconscious or the deep unconscious. Like, it all resides in that side. So for us to interact with the things that are really problematic and stuck inside of us, we have to be experiencing it in real life with real people.
Are you talking about exposure therapy, or is something a little bit different?
Yeah, I think we need to be exposed to that discomfort.
Yeah.
It's exposure therapy, I think, touches on a piece of it.
Okay.
It depends on what kind of exposure therapy you're talking about.
Sure.
Regardless of whether it's like cognitive processing therapy or CBT or other forms of cognitive behavioral therapy, there still has to be the facilitation of a felt embodied relationship with someone who's safe. And that's really where it's below our cognitions. It's coming from areas of the brain, like our limbic system, or even our right hemisphere, that don't have language. They have images, they have body memories, they have sensations, but they don't have that verbal component that we often rely on as adults.
Well, you brought to us 2 slides.
Yeah.
Talk about your other one, the stress and energy that you were describing.
Sure. So in our lives, as stress increases, our brain functioning decreases. So we see a decrease in our ability in these different areas, right? We were just talking about how to heal from things that happened at a lower level, lower layer of our brain, we need to regress in therapy or in groups to re-experience that and work with it. So it means we either have to have a good group leader, or we have to have a good individual therapist who is creating safety during that regression and is also kind of guiding the way into that regressed state. So one, they have to show an openness to it. So this could be, adults feeling like they're small. I mean, I hear that a lot in therapy.
Yeah.
Right now I feel sad and small or scared, and it doesn't make sense. So someone who's still connected, they're stressed, but they're connected enough to their adult self. They're like, I don't get this. So as a therapist, if you show curiosity and openness to that, like, yeah, let's explore it, then it gives them permission to go into those parts of their brain and begin to describe what they're experiencing. We were just talking too about the impact of memory. If we have something stressful happen to us, let's say we get, I have this happen often with clients, they get triggered by an event, something that's close to what they experienced, or close enough to what they experienced in childhood, and they regress in that moment. And then when they lay down that new memory, when that memory is created, it's not created with the things they have access to as an adult. It's only created with the things they have access to as whatever age they regress to. So you might, and this is where it gets really complicated for the clients, they might be, let's say they're a 32-year-old male who gets triggered and now is making a memory that a 5-year-old boy would make. And then when they try to go think through that or talk about that after they've moved away from the trigger, they're in a calm state and they're trying to talk about it with a group or with a therapist, it makes no sense to them because they're not able to access the same aspects of memory that we expect to be able to access as adults. That leads to feelings of shame, confusion. I don't make sense. There must be something wrong with me. I'm broken. And then that can also lead to an intense kind of persecutory voice that comes from your left hemisphere that tells you, like, yeah, dummy, there's something wrong with you. Normal people don't act like this. So to sit with that tension is often really difficult. And that's where, like, a therapist who understands this can help people be curious about themselves. One, they can show them that kindness, the care. Hey, I care for you as an individual. Let's move towards that emotion. Let's move even if it's confusing and doesn't make sense. Let's go in that direction. Let's explore it together. And that helps people then go back into that state and rethink it, work with it, begin to modify it, and turn it into something that they can integrate and ultimately understand then about themselves. And when they make sense, you see this wave of relief come over them. If they have an explanation for what happened to them and it makes sense in a framework that they can grasp, whether it's like IFS, internal family systems language, or whether it's in pictures that they draw, or whether it's in a narrative that they journal or they talk through, then, I'm not bad. I'm not broken. I do make sense.
Yeah. I'm curious though, what is usually, can you give an example of like what a broken feeling is and then realizing, okay, I'm not broken? Can you give like maybe a minor example of that?
Yeah. An example from one of the people I worked with would be, there's a gentleman who had a series of traumatic events and he was acting out sexually but didn't understand it, right? And so he finally gets caught.
Didn't understand why he was doing it?
Doesn't understand why he was doing it, right? But he has this narrative stuck in his head that bad, that's broken, don't go there. That's awful, that's shameful. He finally gets caught, right? And so now he's forced to go to group. He's forced to work through things. And when he comes into care, the biggest barrier to going in that direction and exploring it is that sense of shame. He's not even thinking about the precursors, the experiences early on in life that led to the event of acting out. All he's thinking about is the acting out, and how shameful his normal self or the adult version of himself feels about that acting out, because he knows it's wrong, he knows it's bad, but
he can't help himself.
He can't help himself, and he won't even move towards it to explore what else is connected to it. And so that really shuts down the whole process of healing, because now I'm not allowed to be curious about it. I'm not allowed to think through what might be happening. I also have that same experience happen with, let's take a female client who is having sex with her husband, and then something trips in her head, and she begins to either, I've had them lash out in anger, because now they don't see their husband anymore, they see somebody else. Or they go into a pattern, they go repeat an act that the husband hasn't asked them to do, but it was something done to them. And they become terrified. They don't understand what they're doing. They don't know why they would even want to do that. It's confusing and chaotic in their minds, and they just go, yuck, get me away from that. So when they recover and they try to think about what happened that night, they want nothing to do with it. And so that sense of shame prevents them from moving towards any of those memories or experiences. So when they regress in that moment and they become young and terrified and they're repeating what happened to them, then if it's severe enough, they'll disassociate and they'll kind of disconnect from themselves. They may freeze, they may run. I've had many clients call me or call an emergency line or call the after hours line, and they are driving their car, they don't know where they are, they're at a restaurant, they had to escape, or they're frozen, they can't talk, or they've done something and now they've calmed down, they've bought sex, or they hooked up with somebody at a bar, the guy came on to them and they just went immediately and slept with the guy just to get rid of the stressor. And then the next day they're kind of waking up from the experience, and they feel ashamed about it, and they have no idea why they did what they did. So in those moments, they're in this regress state where they have access to they don't have access to all of their layers of thinking or layers of their brain that they normally would.
So, but you said though that, what they're doing is wrong. And so I'm just trying to make sense of what you meant. So I
guess I went off on a little.
No, you're okay. So you said that when you're sharing your first explanation of it, that they are doing something wrong, but they're not broken. I guess I'm trying to make the connection there of what you meant by that, of oh, I'm not broken. You're not trying to say, oh, I'm not doing anything wrong.
Correct.
You're not saying that. So what did you mean by how they realize I'm not broken? I guess that's the realization I'm looking for.
Okay. So that sense of when you can make the shift from I'm broken, I'm bad to I make sense.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I guess so. And if someone's having, that addiction, that problem, which is clearly wrong.
Sure.
How are they going into I make sense, and how is that transition?
Yeah, so that transition is through a pattern that we've talked about before. First, you have to create a sense of safety with somebody.
Yeah,
that creates an environment where you can co-regulate and decrease stress.
Yeah, when
you decrease your stress, you're able to think more clearly about yourself. You're able to communicate the processes that are going on inside of yourself. And when you can do that with another individual, now you can begin to explore the motivations that might have caused the acting out. And as you do that, you notice that there's less energy associated with the acting out.
Okay.
Because it makes sense. Sometimes I have a client come to the realization that they're hurting themselves or they're hurting others.
Like they're seeing, okay, I know before I felt like the only way for me to get rid of this is this. But now that you know what's happening, you're able to go kind of almost like out of body experience sort of situation. Like, okay, I know what's going on right now, and I know where that's going to go. So now I know this about myself, I can work on in different ways. And they learn what those different things to do.
Yeah,
through.
instead of acting out without knowledge of what's causing the acting out, they're able to take a step back, I think as you put it well, and they're able to observe themselves. And then they're able to think complicatedly about why they are acting out.
Yeah.
And they're able to grieve the parts of them that they didn't have any control over, ways that they were hurt. And they're able to separate out that from the self who's making the choices now.
Right.
So they can be frustrated with the self who's making the choices now, and they can also grieve the younger self who had these horrible experiences, and then they're able to integrate the two, and they're able to see how they interact together, and that helps decrease feelings of shame about what happened in the past, and then it often decreases the need for the acting out in the present. Now, some of those patterns may be so ingrained that they take quite a while to extinguish or to change and modify. But sometimes you can see a pretty quick reduction in the motivation to act out because they're viewing it through a different lens. Mm-hmm. Now they're not just recreating traumatic experiences. They're seeing it as like, wow, there was this hurt kid, and now he's doing this to try to understand what happened to him. It's ugly. I don't want to do that anymore.
I refer to that in the recovery process as the moment that your behavior stops being trauma fueled and simply becomes a bad habit. It's a strong habit. We've used it as a coping mechanism in this maladaptive behavior for decades. But at that moment, it's just a habit. And you can let your moral compass take over and start making real progress on diminishing the egregiousness and the frequency with which you're using that acting out behavior, hopefully, until it's gone.
My last question for you today is, what would you encourage families with their children to do as they're trying to help with preventative techniques and stuff like that? Is it automatically, start your child out with therapy right away? Just not automatic. And it's two questions in one. And then talking about the adult who's like, I got a lot of stuff and I don't know the first step.
Addressing the family. When I get the opportunity to talk in churches or to other groups, I emphasize the power that family members have. Parents are way more powerful than a therapist. And if a child sees a parent go, wow, I've got some things wrong, I'm going to make an amend to you. I'm going to apologize. And now I'm going to sit here with you through this complicated mess that I'm going to take some responsibility for. That speaks an incredible volume of meaning to that child, because now you're saying, I'm going to tolerate your distressing emotions and I'm going to choose to sit with you. I'm placing value upon you. It really lives out that biblical idea that you as an individual have value and you're worth more to me than my discomfort.
Yeah.
So yes, I think parents who can get help and help their kids, fantastic. I'm all for communities helping each other. And then for the individual who feels like, wow, maybe I feel ill-equipped, I don't know where to turn. Pastors can be a good resource if you have those in your church. CR groups, Celebrate Recovery groups, are in a lot of churches. Groups like the Sexual Integrity Project group. And then there's a lot of us therapists around who are really good at maybe helping people triage and go, okay, is this something where maybe you read a couple of books, we do some journaling, it might be just a little bit of information that you need, point you in some positive directions, or maybe you discover that there is something deeper, and this is a journey that you need to go on individually so that others in your family can see that redemptive healing process take place. And if you're looking for a way to inspire your kids, there's nothing more inspiring than a parent who's willing to do work themselves and then come back and share that with their kids. To the degree that it's appropriate. But when they see a parent being able to move towards things that they were avoiding before, that's powerful.
I would like to speak to the guy who says, I've got a lot of stuff and I don't know where to start. I know a lot of those guys, right? I was thinking the other day that a lot of people who are in this situation are performance driven, right? They find their purpose and their value in what they can do. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that is most desiresome of these guys, even though they're doing bad behaviors, is to hear Jesus say to them at the end, well done, good and faithful servant. That's an emotional thing for them. And I realized the other day, he doesn't say, hey, great job never stumbling and tripping along the way. It's you finish the race. Mm-hmm. You accomplish the purpose for which I put you here. Mm-hmm. He never brings up the struggles and the times you start and fall and start again and fall again and start again and fall again. If you woke up and you took a breath this morning, then you still have a purpose here to be able to complete the task which God has given to you, and he's not going to give account for all the times you failed. So if you got a lot of stuff, if you've tried really hard and you've fallen and you got up again, man, keep going. Mm-hmm. Find a therapist, find another one, find a group, keep working on it. This may be a struggle you deal with for the majority of your life, but deal with it. And when you get to the end, when you finally finish that task, even though you were down a lot, you're still going to be able to hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah. Well, prodigal son's father, he celebrated.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, we have to all remember that every individual who has done a lot of stuff, whether it's hard, evil, not all of it, it's sin. And what we hate is sin and not the person. Mm-hmm. The shame is in sin and not the individual who God created. Mm-hmm. And I want to encourage our audience to move forward in that direction, that no matter what is going on with someone who is obviously grown up with and not having a good household, or maybe they did have a good household, but they still didn't develop certain practices on how to deal with their emotional state, with how they react to stress, with many different things. And it could go to the extreme side of purchasing someone for sex, and it could go to the other side of I'm snacking too much. And ultimately it comes down to what is addressing behavior can be done. And there's many ways for it to be done. And I encourage us all to find ways to connect with a therapist, to connect with a group therapy, to connect with ultimately building relationships, to know how can I start dealing with this? And maybe if it needs to go deeper, let's go deeper. And I believe that God has provided us the science, as you are which we only scratch the surface on in the neuroscience, to ultimately know how to help someone on a deeper basis. But it all comes from, and none of it matters unless there's the first, unless there's the foundation of it's the love that Christ gives, and I must give that too. And that's where, speaking of what you said, if you have sin in your life, if you have that's being caused by trauma, we must deal with it. I believe there's shame that comes from it, but don't live in shame. You don't live in sin. It's the whole point, is finding a way out, that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You are not in a cave where you're stuck. There is a way out. And if you're that parent who's working through prevention techniques, I love what you said, that sometimes all it takes is for you to show your vulnerability. Mm-hmm. If I think about the many stories that we've heard about, I came from a great household. It seems that there's one thing in that great household. We must look like a great household, above and beyond, rather than being no, I'm a sinner, just as you are. And I hope you love me as a sinner is the same way I love you as a sinner. And so with everything that occurs from traumatic experiences, through everything that occurs from many, many different things that we could spend many podcasts on, it comes down to knowing that there's a way out, knowing that there's a way to address it, but none of it matters if we cannot first approach it with love and understanding. But also, we're not going to accept the sin. We're not going to accept the shame to make it unshameful. We're not going to bury it so that you feel better. We're going to show I love you, and we can work through this so that you're not dependent upon that sin, dependent upon that break that you need, that ultimately hurts you and others. I wanted to end on that note so that everyone understands that while we know trauma exists, while we know therapy exists, and we know the importance of it, I think that's the thing we often forget is it's love first. And as Alan has said on other podcasts, other episodes, you can't shame someone into fixing this. And so that's not the right response either. And so as we think about addressing the fight against sex trafficking, the fight against abuse, the fight against ultimately depending on sin to watch sin continue in our world, we must first show that we are sinners and we love you as a sinner, because God has called us to love our enemy. And I believe he said that is because all of you are my children, and the only thing that is ultimately hurting everyone is sin, not your brother or sister. So thank you guys for joining us on our podcast today, talking about this. And there's so much, again, we can go so deep, so much deeper with this, but and I hope that we can go deeper on more episodes, more future videos in the future. But ultimately, I want you to think about this for your family, your loved individuals, and maybe even yourself. God loves you. God wants the best for you. And no matter what has happened in your life, it wasn't him. It was sin. And you may find restoration and rehabilitation through him and the work that God provides. And so something like going to Corey as your therapist, going to the Sexual Integrity Project as a group therapy, so on and so forth. Guys, thank you again for joining us on our podcast. We look forward to seeing you on the next one.